Welcome to Disciple Dojo. We are continuing to give some tips on, marking your Bible. At least I'm just marking my compact Bible so that I have some of the notes, some of the markings, some of the concepts highlighted that are normally highlighted in my large study Bible available in my compact Bible so that I can have them with me. And we've done some in Genesis, we've done some in Exodus, we've done some Romans. And each time I think people would get tired of these, you guys say in the comments, these are really interesting. This is really helpful. Do more of these. So I got a lot of study notes in my main study Bible, and a lot of them I want to transfer into this one. So that's what we're doing. And in this episode, we're going to look at Leviticus. So if you appreciate these tip videos, you find them helpful, we would love for you, if you haven't already, to subscribe. Also, just a heads up, Disciple Dojo, we're a 501c3 nonprofit teaching ministry. The bulk of our budget comes from, very, very little comes from YouTube. The majority of what we do is funded by our monthly dojo donors. Those are people that for over 10 years have supported this ministry and helped us make resources freely available. We couldn't survive, literally, without you. What we're doing while supplies last for new dojo donors, people that join and say, we're going to contribute, partner with you, whatever dollar amount. That I don't care. I don't really see any of the money. All of that is handled by our board. But if you become a dojo donor, we would love to send you one of our patches that we've had custom made. You see these on my hats sometimes. And while supplies last, I have about 35, 40 more of these. We would love to get these to new dojo donors. So all you have to do is become a donor, whatever dollar amount. That's between you and the Lord. But if you do that, then go to the top of the page and use the contact form to email me and say, hey, I became a new dojo donor and I would love to get a patch. And you do that, and I'll get your address, and I'll get one of these to you in the mail. Just let me know which one you want, either the darker brown or the lighter off-white color. But yeah, these are just a little way to help get word out about Disciple Dojo and just kind of a tangible thank you to those of you who decide you want to support this channel. And also, if you're already a current dojo donor and you don't have one of these and you want one, just email me. I would love to get one to you. Again, you guys have been the lifeblood of this ministry. All right, let's look at something I think worth highlighting in Leviticus. Now, we spent a year here at Disciple Dojo teaching through Leviticus. If you have not seen any of those videos, they are available in our Leviticus, aka the book Christians usually skip but shouldn't playlist. That's here on the channel. Check it out. Just click the playlist tab. And there are a number of things in Leviticus that are worth marking, and maybe I'll do some more of them in a future video. But in this one, I just want to show you something that I found interesting that I think is worth considering, whether or not you find it persuasive. So back in 1999, anthropologist named Mary Douglas published this book, Leviticus as Literature. This is from Oxford University Press, which means, unfortunately, it's very expensive. If you can find a digital copy, that would be the way to go. This paperback is, I've seen it upwards of $50. And unless you are like a super nerdy Leviticus scholar, you're probably not going to drop that kind of money on a, 200-page paperback. But Douglas made a number of contributions to the study of Leviticus. Again, she's an outsider in terms of biblical scholarship. She's not a biblical scholar. She's an anthropologist. And she looked at Leviticus through the lens of cultural anthropology. And some of her findings and conclusions were challenged. Some were dismissed by biblical scholars, but a number of them were recognized as pretty profound. So this is a work that I think, if you're interested in studying Leviticus, you need to take into account. Doesn't mean you're going to agree with everything she says. I certainly don't. But it means that her work is important enough to know about. And one of the things that I found really interesting about this book, and this actually helped me teach through the book here at Disciple Dojo, was the structure that she proposes for Leviticus. In Leviticus, there are two narrative sections in the entire book, which is pretty significant. Leviticus is not a short book, and to only have two sections that are narrative, and they're uneven too. Like one is 3 chapters long, and then one is just half of one chapter. But what Douglas proposed is that those two narratives put where they are essential for understanding the structure of Leviticus. And so I'll show you what she suggests. So this is on page 221 of her book, and she lays out the tabernacle. Now, she was laying it out on a north-south axis rather than east-west as it's typically laid out. But she notes that the tabernacle, you have the outer court, then you have the holy place, and then you have the Holy of Holies. And the things that are in each section are labeled: altar, laver, table, lampstand, altar of incense, and the ark. And this structure, this tabernacle structure, is divided by screens, basically two screens. You have the entrance, and then you have one screen that divides off the holy place. And then within that screen, you have a screen that divides the holy place from the Holy of Holies. And so what Douglas has suggested is that the entrance, the screen 1 and screen 2, those two narrative sections, intentionally structure the book as if you're taking a walking tour of each section of the tabernacle before moving on to the next part. And so she says, imagine the reader using the book of Leviticus as a guide around the tabernacle. It starts at the entry, from where the Lord called Moses in the first line, that's Leviticus 1:1. The visitor starts accordingly at the entrance and walks down the right side, and she has the chapter numbers here, chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, following chapters 1 through 7. And she says, in the outer court, a fire always burns on the main altar of sacrifice, and the people come to make their offerings. It contains the altar of burnt offering and the laver for the priest to wash in. Appropriately, the first chapters, 1 through 7, give the rules for sacrifices made at the initiative of the laity for sin, guilt, peace, or thanksgiving. Walking in this direction, the visitor encounters the screen that in the building separates the court from the sanctuary. So she says, you're walking around chapters 1 through 7. These all have to do with the tabernacle sacrifices, and then you get to chapters 8, 9, and 10. In the book, the narrative at chapters 8 through 10 corresponds to the first screen. The narrative ends calamitously with the deaths of Aaron's sons who approached the sanctuary with unconsecrated or unholy fire in their incense burners. At this point, a guide always has to make a choice. Should he lead the way through the screen? The courtyard is very big. If the visitors go through the screen when they come to it, will they ever see the other side of the courtyard? It would be advisable to complete the tour of the court so that they can appreciate the correspondences between the two sides. So you're going around, you come to the first screen, which is, she thinks that's what the first narrative signifies. And then before going into the next part of the tabernacle, you want to continue so you see the whole outer court. So that's chapters 11 through 17. And they correspond to chapters 1 through 7. She says, this strategy recognizes chapters 11 through 16 are already aligned in parallel opposite chapters 1 through 7. The two sections, 1 through 7 and 11 through 17, are complementary in theme and ought to be read together. Chapters 1 through 7 are about how the people should bring their gifts to the altar for sacrifice and how their sins and defilements need atonement. Chapters 11 through 15 give examples of defilement. Chapter 16 describes how atonement is made. In chapter 16 being Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. And then in chapter 17, the lesson of the opening verses is repeated that all animal slaughter must be brought to the tabernacle to be sacralized. The ring has already been closed. This is the latch which confirms the return to the point of origin. In other words, we've come back full circle. The beginning of chapter 17 echoes the words and reinforces the teaching of chapter 1. And then she has a section showing some of the shared concepts and vocabulary in Leviticus 1 and Leviticus 17. So she says, it's necessary part of the book's design that the biggest space of the tabernacle, that's the outer court, correspond to the largest number of chapters, 7 for each side. The reader now knows the way. The tour of the first of the 3 compartments is complete. The text can proceed straight through the screen at chapters 8 through 10, which divides the outer court from the sanctuary. And so she goes on and says, in this light, the book is somewhat like a pilgrimage text. The worshipers make a journey of commemoration to a shrine and go round it with the sacred book as their guide, saying the words, marking out their footsteps with the very place of creation, or at least a space assigned by God to stand for his act of creation. So she says, learning the book becomes a way of internalizing the tabernacle. It suggests a form of spiritual geography that distinguishes the spiritual tabernacle from the physical tabernacle in the same way as the spiritual Jerusalem was distinguished from from the physical Jerusalem at the center of the world. At the same time, moving around the tabernacle with the book, they are also moving around Mount Sinai and even having access to parts of it that only Moses had. Now, for more on how the tabernacle is like a miniature Mount Sinai, see our series here in our Bible Backgrounds playlist. We do a deep dive into the symbolism of the tabernacle, Mount Sinai, the mountain of God, Eden. We go all out. If you're a Bible nerd, you'll love that series. Check it out. So, summarizing this proposed structure, Douglas says the narratives have suggested an unexpected partitioning of the book. They divided into 3 unequal compartments with laws filling the spaces between the stories. These compartments correspond to the relative size of the chambers in the desert tabernacle built according to God's instructions in Exodus. The result is to project the 3 parts of the book on the tripartite architecture of the tabernacle, itself modeled on the 3-zone proportions of the holy mountain. When the laws have been placed, as it were, in each part of the building as prescribed by their position in the book, they turn out to describe the contents or actions that are supposed to be performed in the appropriate compartment, or to describe the requirements for entry into it. Other markers are placed along the way to confirm the parallel. So I want to have this structure, this concept that Douglas is proposing, signified in my study Bible. But again, because I'm trying to keep this relatively clean and not have a bunch of handwritten notes, I want to do it visually in a way that's just easy for me. This is my personal Bible, so it's easy for me to understand. And so, since we're talking about the tabernacle, I'm going to use bronze, silver, and gold Prismacolor pencils. The very first, narrative section, not even really a narrative, it's the entrance to the book. I'm going to mark this first line using bronze color pencil because that's going to correspond to the base of the pegs that the outer courtyard sits upon. So there we have our first entrance into this textual tabernacle. Then we come to the first narrative section, and that is chapters 8, 9, and 10. This is the scene where Aaron's sons are ordained, where the offering, the tabernacle itself, basically starts functioning. And then there's a catastrophe because Aaron's sons, who should have known better, who've been months training for this, and we've just had, 7 chapters worth of this is how you're to do it. They all of a sudden decide, we're just going to wing it. And the results of that are the events of Leviticus chapter 10. So I want to show that in the text as well. And I'm going to do that using silver because this is the second section of the tabernacle. And the silver corresponds to the top of the poles that hold up the outer tent courtyard, as well as the base of the tabernacle itself. And then lastly, we come to the last narrative, the second narrative really in the book, and that is the case of the blasphemer. And this has to do with the Holy of Holies, the very identity of God and God's name. And so we're going to use gold to mark this narrative because that is what the inside of the Holy of Holies was covered with. So now it's easy as I'm flipping through Leviticus, I can know which section am I in. Am I in the section that, in Douglas's opinion, at least corresponds to the outer courtyard, and that would begin with this bronze narrative section? Or reading through the silver narrative, moving past that, coming to chapters 11 through 24, am I in the holy place, that part that has the cloud of incense, the bread of the presence, the lampstand, where the priests go and perform atonement? Or passing through this final small gold narrative, am I at the end of the book, which corresponds to being in the very presence of God and dwelling with God on God's holy mountain? So it's not so much that I'm saying this is how you have to read Leviticus, but rather I have marked in my travel Bible now in a very easy to remember way the structure of Leviticus that Mary Douglas has proposed. So if that's helpful to you, great. If not, no worries at all. We have a video here with tips on reading Leviticus. We also sat down and talked with our friend Jay Sklar about his fantastic Leviticus commentary that Zondervan published last year. So if that interests you, check that out. We've got plenty of resources that will help you better understand this criminally overlooked book of the Bible, Leviticus, the book Christians usually skip but shouldn't. If you found this helpful, again, we'd appreciate if you haven't already subscribing, liking, sharing, following, commenting, any of that stuff just really helps this channel continue to grow. That's all for now. We'll see you back here next time at Disciple Dojo. As always, keep training.